Um, we are already, it's already time for our last speaker, and we have the honor that Patty Aluskewicz is here. She did a great talk last year at our first conference, and I'm really looking forward to this one on shaky ground. What plate tectonics can teach us about resistance to Scrum. If that doesn't interest you, I don't know what will. So please go ahead, Patty.
Sure, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to share my screen. We'll get started here. All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. And of course, thank you once again for having me at the Serious Scrum Conference. It's an honor to be here 2 years in a row. And as I was mentioning before we started here, I love to talk about things in a different way, put a different spin on Agile. And I often look to my past careers to come up with some of those interesting topics to talk about. Last year, I talked about Isaac Newton and Newton's laws, his 3 laws of physics. And typically we think about that in terms of inanimate objects acting and reacting. But the connection that I made is, even though we are living, breathing organisms, we're not inanimate objects. We are still subject to those laws of physics in terms of our interactions with people in our organizations. So I was searching for another idea of what I can connect of science to what we see in front of us in our Agile organizations. And I came up with the idea of plate tectonics. So we're going to talk about science today. We're going to talk about how plate tectonics is something we can look to understand what's going on in our organizations. And then, so what? What do we do about it? How do we address these issues? So let's get started here. In my junior year of college, so this was a long time ago, I studied in Western Ireland. So I had the fortunate opportunity of jumping on one of those big double-decker planes, flying across the Atlantic Ocean from where I currently live in the United States. And I ended up here, rural Ireland, beautiful green rolling hills, lots of stone walls in various states of repair, disrepair, and of course, lots of sheep. I was kind of like this the whole time, however, because it rained every single day, despite the beautiful landscape. Now, you might ask, well, what was I doing there? How did I end up here? This girl from the East Coast of the United States. I was studying the work of this man. Now, your next question might be, well, who is this man? Probably not familiar to you. His name was Alfred Wegener. He was born in Berlin, Germany in 1880, and he passed away in 1930. So this is a bit before our time, but I was here to study his work. So who was he? He was well respected in many different fields. Paleoclimatology, so the study of ancient climates. Meteorology, of course, we know the study of weather patterns. He was a polar researcher, which might explain his big fuzzy hat. He was also a geologist. He studied the Earth, and a geophysicist. So he studied how the parts of the Earth interact with each other. And all these years later, here I am sitting in my Agile Coach role. I realized, wait a second, I think he was a Scrum Master too. Now you might say, well, that's crazy, Patty. Scrum wasn't around back then, but I started to see some uncanny parallels between what he did and what he faced in his organization and what we face in our Scrum organizations today. So a little bit about me before we get into Alfred Wegener. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm right here on the East Coast. It is 10 a.m. for me. I have a bachelor's degree in geology, so that's how I got interested in Alfred Wegener and his research. And then I took my education and I went into science education. So I studied at Harvard University. I was all ready to go, deposited myself into a middle school classroom and found out that that was also a crazy environment, much like our Scrum environments. Fast forward many careers later, many pivots. I'm currently an Agile coach at PwC here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I also do some Agile career coaching, one-on-one coaching, group coaching, as well as, you might guess, speaking, keynote speaking, corporate speaking, meetup speaking, conference speaking. So today's backlog, we're going to take a look at Alfred Wegener and his story. We're going to look at the challenges he faced in transforming the mindset of his organization. And this organization was not a Scrum organization or a technology company. This was the scientific community. We're going to look to the natural world around us to understand our most challenging organizational problems. What can we learn from nature? And how can we use this information to best prepare us for current and future challenges so we can find more success as Agilists? So let's get back to Alfred Wegener. So much like us, he was an experimenter. He was a scientist. He went out into the world and he did observations. And then, of course, he collected his data and presented his data to the scientific community. But what did he observe? He observed something that might seem obvious to us today, but was kind of novel at the time. The East Coast of the United States and South America fit kind of nicely like puzzle pieces into the West Coast of Africa and Europe. And he came up with the hypothesis that the continents were once together as one landmass. He called this Pangea, which based on your Latin interpretation is all earth, whole land, something of that nature. But like every person coming in front of a community saying, this is my observation, this is my hypothesis, what is my data that supports it? So what he noticed through his studies is that the rock layers in the brown bands here, so exactly the places I was speaking about, line up pretty nicely. Similar rocks, similar fossils, and he decided that it was probably easier to explain that the continents were together and these rock layers form and the continents then separated. And as you imagine, I was in Ireland studying right there in the middle of his data. And this is where I went to college at Hofstra University in Long Island, also studying some of that data within his bands there. And he went on a little bit further to say, well, if the continents were all together, these fossils lined up pretty nicely. And what he found was fossils of big, giant land-dwelling organisms were on the west coast of Africa and throughout the middle there of South America. Maybe it made more sense that the continents were together and they walked across and lived in that area. That was an easier explanation. So as a Scrum Master, or any person in your organization trying to advance Agile ideas, what have you encountered when you observe, you collect data, and then you go and present it to your teams? So feel free to throw some things in the chat. If anybody wants to just kind of call out, when you're kind of like Alfred Wegener, what do you experience?
Anybody feel free to unmute if you want.
Yeah, I have one. What I sometimes experience when I present something that is novel, that you get a lot of disbelief. So people tend to dismiss the data as being possibly true immediately, right?
Yes. And I would ask you, do we work for the same company?
It's yeah.
Has
And
anybody else experienced that?
Recognize that.
I do recognize that. Yeah, we often come with observations, and yeah, people really have to bump their heads themselves, I guess, before they think that these are ideas that they can work with. Yeah.
And it puts us in a very challenging situation because we are obviously experts. We've been around the block. And sometimes we fall into the trap of wanting to solution for the team. And especially if they're asking, okay, so now you've said this to us, what do we do about it? And that can be a very difficult position to be in because you want to help them. But it does, unfortunately, provide more opportunities for resistance to come your way. But as you can imagine, Alfred Wegener experienced the very same thing from the scientific community. So it's not so far off to say we should look to him for what happens. He was viewed as an outsider in the geology community. So even though I listed off all of these places that he was an expert in, if you think about 100 or so years ago, data wasn't so free-flowing across the world as it is today. So scientific communities were in their silos. They didn't communicate. So to come to a new scientific community and present evidence, they didn't want to hear it. And they were very resistant to what he had to say. Now, I don't know about you, but this is my experience in my Agile and Scrum organizations. Despite our best efforts or what's happened before us, there are people that are in silos based on their skill set. And when you talk about this, people, they don't want to hear it, right? A mistake he made was criticizing the current entrenched belief. And, this is often a trap that we fall into. We say, well, this is the problem. This is what you're doing wrong. And we have to stop ourselves. Even if what the folks across from us are doing makes absolutely no sense. So the scientific community thought that, and this is why I'm like, oh, this sounds crazy. A land bridge appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't explain it, but it appeared. It connected the two continents and the dinosaurs walked across. And then at some point, the land bridge disappeared. Despite they didn't have any evidence, this is what they believed. And they dug their heels in. But he couldn't explain the mechanism of how the continents moved. And even when he tried to, he said that it was moving at a much faster rate. So his data was incorrect. And they found it unbelievable. So he was kind of down for the count here. But he was committed to his craft. He continued his research. He continued sharing his findings until his untimely death in 1930. And it required a lot of courage on his part, like it requires us to keep going. We got to dig deep in order to continue to help our organizations and not give up. So you might say, well, that's all, folks, right? This is the end. Because sometimes we leave our organizations, they go back to their old ways, and it's frustrating and upsetting that we spent all this time. But I will tell you, there's a light at the end of the tunnel with Alfred Wegener. This was not all in vain. So what did they find out after his death? So fast forward a couple of decades, the scientific community began to come around. They began to rethink their resistance. Advances in technology, so sonar and submarine, confirmed that the seafloor was indeed spreading in the Atlantic Ocean. So World War II was incredibly disruptive, but it did help us see the bottom of the ocean floor. And scientists were able to confirm what Alfred Wegener was talking about. And they started to do more research as to what was going on. Now, what they discovered is the Earth's crust is broken up into tectonic plates. And at these plate boundaries, which you can kind of see outlined here, there were all these interactions happening. So in some places, the seafloor was spreading apart, but it makes sense that the Earth is a constant circumference. So at some point, it's going to have to collide and clash somewhere else. So scientists realized that there were 3 types of plate interactions. So there is what's called the divergent boundary, which is going on in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, right? The seafloor is spreading, the ocean is getting wider, and the continents are moving further apart. Now, this happens very slowly, but we can confirm this is happening. So in other places, such as the Himalayan mountains, continents are coming together. They're clashing and converging. In other places, we have continents or pieces of crust sliding past each other. A good example is the San Andreas Fault. So in the chat, which do you think causes the most disruption? Okay, so we have a mid-Atlantic ridge, so we have a divergent. We have somebody voting for the middle one, the convergent, number 3. Okay, we have number 3. Number 3. Well, I won't answer the question just yet, but let's take a look at what happens at these boundaries. Because the whole intent here is to look to nature, to look at what's going on Earth and see what we can learn from it. How do we translate this to what's going on in our organization? So how to recognize the tectonic behaviors in your organization. So the divergent boundary, which is in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, looks like this: avoidance behavior. Now, we've all seen this happen. Something is driving a wedge between 2 or more people, and they move apart. They avoid each other. This leads to larger and larger fractures in our organization. Now, this might be going on underneath the surface. It might not be too disruptive, right? We don't really know something's going on underneath the Atlantic Ocean, but it is. Convergent. This is where clash and conflict occurs. So 2 plate boundaries are clashing with each other. What I want you to notice in this diagram is very similar to what goes on in your organization. Due to hierarchy and power differentials, one person or group stays on top and another person or group goes underneath. They get shut down, they get silenced. And the hippo, we call them, is the one that's, making all the loud noise, and everyone else kind of gets tamped down. Maybe at some point there's some bubbling to the surface, right? So there's some little explosions. So that's the clash and conflict. But ultimately, that person that's on top wants to stay on top. So transform, what does this look like? This is where we get an unexpected earthquake. And if you think, yeah, the highest paid person's opinion, yes. If you think about what happened recently in Morocco, you can see the devastation. You saw the pictures, what happened. This happened in the middle of the night, and there was a lot of death and destruction. And they're still trying to get out from underneath it. So this is where people will rub up against each other, friction will occur, tension will build up. Maybe it's under the surface, but at some point there's a slippage that happens and this energy is released. And there are people that might see this coming and they try to brace themselves or hide, much like animals might do during an earthquake. But this causes severe damage that is difficult to recover from. So those of you that said 3, winner, winner, chicken dinner, because this is what causes us a great amount of destruction. But that's not to say that all of these 3 things are not happening, contributing to our problem, because they all do. So how to solve for this? How to solve for the plate tectonics that are going on in your organization? Despite these three different scenarios, which are happening simultaneously, which might be very overwhelming, the underlying problem is the same, right? When we dig through all the challenges, when we get to the root cause, it is human beings struggle with their interactions with each other. Now, if you've seen me talk about some of other topics, I always kind of go back to my education background and my experience as a science teacher. The point that I always stress is that the behaviors that we see manifesting in our organizations as adults started in childhood. It started and was reinforced in the classroom, where you have the hippo, the highest paid person in the classroom, that might be the teacher. And the goal of the students is to please the teacher, to kind of do what they say, memorize facts for a test, spit them out. As long as we get an A, we're good. And the challenge is that this behavior pattern builds up and repeats, and then it shows up in our organizations. We are not really prepped in school to operate in agile organizations. And the education system, and I guess I'll speak from the United States, but I hear it's similar in other places, that the education system has not caught up with the expectations of our businesses. So when is education going to catch up? I don't know that answer. But the fact of the matter is we are dealing with the repercussions down the line of that. So we are not taught those soft skills. We are not taught how to resolve conflict because it's uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, we have to pass the tests. So with that in mind, as hard as it is for us, we have to recognize that that's there, that's under the surface. But we have to not wait until there's an eruption. There's always things under the surface. And I love this mural. I found this on Pixabay or something. This is a Banksy, if you're familiar with him. He goes out and spray paints these things all over the world on, abandoned buildings and such. But this illustrates the point. There are people that are sweeping all of this under the carpet because they don't want to look at it, and then just put the carpet down because we got to focus on the work. Just because everyone is acting like and telling you that this stuff doesn't exist, your eyes and ears are not tricking you. It does exist. It's there. We are just in the uncomfortable position of having to help people see it, acknowledge it, admit it out loud, and then start having discussions about it. This is really uncomfortable. It puts us in an uncomfortable position to learn how to navigate this. But again, we're not taught how to do this in school, so we're kind of the blind leading the blind. And that's why the Scrum community is so important, because we can help each other with techniques how to do this. So let me share some stories from my experience. And, these may work for you, this may not, but this is kind of what I've noticed as I've traveled down my Agile road, beginning from my science career. I feel like it's my responsibility to get people to talk, and not just talk about the work and the tasks and the story points and the metrics. What's going on in the organization? So when I go into a company or a team or a domain or a portfolio, I set up one-on-one meetings with people, and I tell them, I'm there to help. I'm there to listen. What's going on? What do you notice is a challenge in your organization? I get them to trust me because, and I'll talk to you a little bit about why in my next slide, but it's very important that I try to build trust with as many people as possible, because this makes it a little bit easier for the next step, getting these folks to communicate and talk with each other. Now, this is always a challenge because, again, there are people that run from conflict. There are people that want to have their voice heard. There are people that create this friction, whether it's intentional or not. And the key is how to navigate this conflict in a very productive way. So in my one-on-one conversations with people, saying, so you're having this challenge. Have you talked to the other person about it? What have you tried? What has been their response? And sometimes they say, oh, we tried, we can't do this Agile thing. But this is a human thing. This is a human interaction thing. And if we're going to solve our problems, we've got to all get on the same page. Finally, as a group, how do we navigate a retrospective, or how do we navigate the group as a whole having this discussion? And the key is recognizing that they will not have a successful retrospective conversation if the two steps are not in place first. If they can't trust you, if they can't start to trust each other, the retrospective will not be productive. So when I go into an organization or a team and I start having my one-on-ones and I start observing and I start listening and I start reading between the lines, I find myself, because I'm a visual person, putting people on a spectrum. And I can't avoid doing this. This is just something that happens in my brain. I don't know the name of it. I call it the spectrum of resistance. You can call it something else. But what you will find is you will encounter a continuum of people. You have people that will cheer for you, say, yes, we're so excited. We're here. You're here. We've been waiting for you. I'm ready to work with you. You have people that are happy. Yes, we're glad you're here. We need your help. You have people that are in the middle there. They're kind of uncertain. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I want to, get these problems addressed, but I'm really not sure how to do this. Then you have people towards the orange, right? They're very resistant. They say, so what? Or we're fine, or some of these other reasons that you hear them saying. And the important point is to not take this personally, and that's very difficult. Then you get to the end of the spectrum there. The people are like, get out of here. We don't need your help. You're disrupting. And understanding and having empathy and compassion for the people towards the red and orange, because it's important to build relationships with these people, because you need to understand where their behaviors are coming from. Most times it's because they're operating from a place of fear. They're afraid mostly of losing their job, and it's understandable. But the key is you may have to talk to all of these different people in a different way. That one way does not work for all. So how do I approach teams? This has become, I put this up on LinkedIn every once in a while, this cat meme. People find it funny, but I'm serious about it. I always try to reflect on myself. Am I talking the talk, or am I walking the walk? Because if I can't stand up in front of people and talk to them about the challenges I face and the personal growth that I've had to go through in order to get where I am, and the uncomfortableness of all of this, why are they going to listen to me when I say, hey, just go have that tough conversation with that person over there? They're not. They have to understand that I've been through this and I'm speaking from experience, and I made it out the other side. What I do, and this is something that I just said, I got to put the cards on the table and acknowledge that Agile coaches and Scrum Masters are often seen as, I don't want to say the enemy, but they're not looked upon very favorably. And I was listening to Artur talk at Scrum Masters of the Universe a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about when he went into his one of his organizations, he was the 8th Agile coach. So you can imagine what the people are thinking as he shows up as just another Agile coach. So you have to figure out, how do I not be all those 7 people that rubbed those folks the wrong way? How do I acknowledge that this probably could have happened, but I am not that? And if I say, I'm not going to throw the Scrum book at you, I'm not going to throw the Agile values and principles at you and tell you all the violations and you need to fix these things or else, which is sometimes how we're perceived, whether we want to or not, I have to tell them, it is not my intention to do that. I want to do something differently. But the thing is, I have to follow through on that. So when I go into a team, right, I observe and they say, well, hey, what did you observe? Tell us what we're doing wrong. I can't fall into that trap. I bring people together and say, okay, I see what's going on. I have to get these people to talk about these challenges amongst themselves, and I have to facilitate that conversation to some sort of action item. And I have to stick to that and not give my 2 cents. And sometimes that's really, really hard. So walking the walk is very important. And no matter what your role is, whether you're a Scrum Master, Agile Coach, or any other role in your organization, seeing yourself as a coach, going in, listening first, asking clarifying questions, being careful not to ask leading questions. Like, have you noticed this is happening? What do you notice is happening? Why do you think that's happening? Help them say these things out loud so they hear themselves saying it. I reassure people, what you're experiencing is 100% normal. This is not a so-and-so team or so-and-so organization problem, because a lot of times they will say, well, we're special snowflakes. This is the way we have to do it. We can't do Agile. We can't do Scrum. Like, no, I've worked in a lot of different companies with a lot of different teams, a lot of different industries. The challenges are the same. So this is normal. My goal is to help you solve this. So what have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? Why? Helping them talk through, okay, now that we've gotten all that off the table, what can we try next? And then helping them commit to taking action and following up with them. Now, this is individual, this is as a group, and this might be as a portfolio or domain. The next thing is teachable moments. And I'm very passionate about this because I consider myself a teacher, even though I'm no longer in the classroom. Taking the opportunity to just drop hints and nuggets and things into random conversations with people, especially with your allies. They're already on your side. So if you give them the tools and language, they're more likely to go out and use that same language and talk to people and repeat what you say. If I want to say it frankly, people are listening, and even they may not seem they're listening, or they push back or they challenge you, they are listening. And it's been really interesting as I facilitating tough conversations with teams, people that push back to me in public, right, in front of all these people as I'm trying to get them to an action item. I talk to them one-on-one, and it's like they don't hate me. They're just curious. They have questions. They want to understand. They want to understand who I am and where I'm coming from. So it's really interesting not to judge these awkward situations you might find yourself in as bad or you're failing. Because when you talk to people one-on-one, you will find that they really appreciate what it is that you're doing. And what I will suggest is making sure that this is on the spot. It doesn't come across as lecturing, like I'm going to stand up and do a workshop because your estimation is bad. It's more of dropping stuff into conversation. I will, in the middle of a meeting, hey, you know what? I have this really great book that I want to recommend. Have any of you read it? And I start to talk about it, and most times people have not. What I've found is when you surround yourself with very passionate people, such as the Scrum community or the LinkedIn community, we are all familiar with a lot of these books and techniques and tools. But when you go into organizations, They're not, because they're not having this continuous dialogue like we are. They may have just been slid into a Scrum Master role and they're trying to survive. So what I do is I take the books that have really changed me and I start talking about them everywhere I possibly can. Hey, have you heard of this book? Most of the time, the answer is no. You know what? Let me do a quick Google search. Let me pull this up. This is what Patrick Lencioni, I mean, the essence of his book is. And instead of me lecturing them about this, going up into the higher levels of learning, can you explain this to us? What do you notice here? And get them to answer the questions. Why is the absence of trust the foundation of it all? What happens when it's not there? What are you noticing in your teams now that you're aware of this? So I name drop this in conversations. I put this up randomly in meetings, and I have to have the courage to do that. I have a conversation around it. I get them to talk about it as opposed to me lecturing. Then I might tell a story about some past team that I, helped through this pyramid. We made it. We got through it. So I know you folks can do it too. And I want to plug this as well. Michael Lloyd, I'm sure you're all familiar with him. And if you're not, please look him up on LinkedIn. He is a thought leader. He has created what's called dysfunction mapping. I attended this workshop in the summer, and I was really blown away by how he taught us, the group, this cohort, step by step, how to map the dysfunctions that we are seeing in our teams, and how it gives us, talking points to go to a leader, and it gives us a tool to help us do our jobs better. What it also taught me, and I watch him as a facilitator, what is he doing that I can learn from? So when I want to be the facilitator in my organization of this activity, what can I do? So not only did I participate in this, I learned by watching him so I can implement this in my organization. So I don't know when the next one is coming up, but this was highly valuable to me. And I really appreciate how this was hands-on and skill-based and not just lecturing. So to kind of wrap us up here, and let me just quickly plug in my laptop so it doesn't run out of battery. What can we learn from Alfred Wegener? So let's circle back to our friendly Scrum Master / scientist. He encouraged me to never stop studying and learning my craft. It gets very difficult sometimes. Sometimes you want to throw in the towel, give up. There's too many balls that are being dropped. I don't know what to do. And you get very frustrated. But in studying how, the legacy that he left behind and how people picked up the ball and kept going with it, gave me hope. Experiment and share your conclusions, but go about it the right way. Instead of saying, this is my data, this is what you're doing wrong, and criticize people, say, this is what I observed. What do you think of it? Get them to say what it is. And then once they say it, okay, what do we do about this? And sometimes that may take a few tries. Look to the world around you for answers. When I get frustrated, I go out in nature and I see what's going on in science and how I can learn from that, how that applies to human interaction. And with plate tectonics or Newton's laws, I was able to draw those clear correlations so I can feel inspired by what I'm looking as I'm walking down the street. But the key to success is to understand human beings, human behavior, understand that people struggle with their interactions. And it's your job to help build relationships help them build relationships with each other, empathize with each other, increase their emotional intelligence. So they are prepared for when there's a conflict, and they're confident that they can navigate it as opposed to sweep it under the carpet and have a bigger eruption. And it will give them encouragement to keep going, because the challenges never end. You uncover one, you address it, right? And a bigger one pops up. And there gets to be a sense of fatigue. And you're there to coach them, to remind them how far they've come, so they can ultimately do what we're all here to do, is to deliver value successfully to the customer. Keeping our eyes on that and understanding how the customers are benefiting from all the pains that we're dealing with gives us hope to keep going. So thank you for your time and attention. And I want to put this out to the audience. Do you have any questions about what you heard today? And of course, feel free to connect with me afterwards if you think of something at a later time.
There is shy people in this call. Huh? Couple of hand claps. I don't have questions either. Really enjoyed it. Really interesting.
But I would like to share that I really understand now how plate tectonics and Scrum Mastery relate. That's really great how you put those two together. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm just inspired by what I see going on in the world around me. And it starts my wheels turning. And then what can I learn from this, and how can I apply this to what I see in my everyday world?
Yeah, I really like this out of the box thinking and seeing patterns that may not seem very obvious, but when you look a bit closer, that are quite the same. Very interesting.
It's not that I have a question, but when you mentioned there's some people, when you say I'm a Scrum Master or an Agile Coach, they go, oh, one of those. Coach, are you going to coach me? They're a bit allergic straight away. I moved to a different company, and there they still call you Scrum Master or Agile Coach, but your main role is change expert. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I quite like that. In a way, it's a little bit maybe something more that people understand actually what you're there for, and that you're an expert actually. Yeah, believe me, trust me that I know. I speak from experience, kind of thing. I mean, I still, get that. I get those looks. Oh, well, you're gonna tell me how to do the things. But I thought it was interesting. I never saw that before. Change expert.
Yeah. I think the challenging thing that, as we learn from trial and error here, going into a team or a new organization, I don't talk about the Agile values and principles or the Scrum guide, because I know there's that reaction. Are you going to force this on us? We've already tried this, right? So I'm trying to eliminate that resistance up front. So, and I still get it, by the way. People will still say to me, well, we can't do Agile. We tried this. We're special snowflakes. That's my term, but this is kind of what they say to me. And I'm like, I didn't bring up Agile. I didn't bring up the Scrum guide. I'm not throwing the book at you. I'm not coming down from the mountain with the, whatever you want to relate it to, the 10 Commandments, saying these are the laws and you have to follow them or else. I say, what's your problem? Estimation, we got to try to solve that. And it's not the estimation, right? We dig and dig and dig, and it's not the estimation. There's so much underneath. And you have to get people past this focus on estimation or the focus on whatever, and understand that this is human dynamics that we need to adjust, and how somebody has to have the courage to make the first adjustment. And people will react. They will probably get upset, but it's not to go back to the old behavior. it's okay now that this is realized, we got to fix this now, right? And then once we tamp that down, this fire appears, we got to address this. And I'm going through this with the team right now. So it's like, I want to tell the stories, but I don't want to talk about it, right? Because I'm in the middle of it and I don't want to give away all the secrets, what's going on in my organization. But I'm dealing with
That's
this
very
now.
recognizable.
Yeah, every organization, I think we have that. Yeah, recognize it a lot.
So,
any other questions or remarks from anybody? Well, then in the main room in 5 minutes, probably the other track is also finishing off. Hopefully, we'll meet and we'll have a couple of closing words. And but yeah, thanks a lot, Betty. Really interesting. I will stop recording now.